Hi everyone, this is Ekaterina, and today I'll be talking about labels that we sometimes assign to other people or even to ourselves, and how they are formed and why they can have an impact on the counseling relationship. So first of all, please allow me to explain what I mean by labeling. And in fact, using labels means describing someone or something using a very short phrase or a single word. So when we're talking about individuals, you could actually say that we're giving them a new name or a new title. And even though in most cases we think of labeling as something connected to the physical appearance, we will see somebody and we might think that they look sexy or hot. But more often it's actually linked to the behaviors. So somebody who is very active might be called a busy bee, or somebody who has specific interest or displays specific behaviors might be labeled as nerd back in school. Nonetheless, I think we will all agree that labels is something that we usually see as a negative thing, because in fact what we're doing here is judging a member of a specific group, whether we're talking about specific nationality, religion, ethnicity, or gender, and really making that judgment based on a very specific, sometimes single characteristic. And what I found very much interesting about using labels as described in our class is the fact that more often we focus on the fact that labels can hurt other people's feelings because maybe those labels are not really correct or representative. But the bigger danger here, I believe, is that when we use labels on other people, we're actually limiting our own curiosity to explore connections with those people. So in our mind, when we create a label, we are convincing ourselves that we know who those people are, and perhaps even making judgments with regards to what sort of system of values and beliefs that person has, and whether it will align or oppose your own. And I think it's quite sad in a way that we are not trying to really understand other people. And I think everyone would agree that if we were on the receiving end of this, if we met somebody for the very first time and we were dismissed so quickly because they formed a very quick decision about who we are, well, that just feels unfair. But the reality of things is that this is something that is constantly done. This is something that other people do, and this is even something we do ourselves, whether willingly or unconsciously, because it's just another natural way of living. And just like I described prejudice and how it is formed, same with labeling. What happens here is that our brain is just trying to make sense of this world. So in a way, it is categorizing our experiences and people we have met, so that when we're in a new situation or meeting a new person, it's a bit easier for us to make a decision as to whether we think we'll find them interesting, whether we could be friends, allies, or maybe we should avoid them because we don't feel, very safe, or this situation could be quite dangerous. But again, we are kind of making that judgment very quickly based on our previous experiences, and it's not always true. And another danger of labeling is that quite often it tends to have this absolute feeling. So some individuals who get allocated a label might feel like this is something that will define them for the rest of their life. And in fact, I can see multiple people who are still trapped in the labels that they received perhaps back in school years. And I'm not an exception here as well. And I would actually like to share my own experience. As I said, I'm sure I had lots of labels assigned to me throughout the life, and some of them I created myself. But as I said, there was one specific label that definitely had one of the biggest impacts. And that's the label of the perfect student. Now, I know that this doesn't sound very dramatic, but in fact, what happened here is that when I went to school, when I was 7 years old, I actually really enjoyed that experience. I liked learning about new things, and in a way, I found this new knowledge coming to me quite easily. And it's really hard to kind of spot exactly when this image or label was created of the perfect student, and even who created it, whether it was other students, the teacher, my mother, or myself. I think it was a combination of all four. Nonetheless, what happened here is that as the years progressed and the study program became more and more difficult, I started to notice that I was struggling with maintaining that perfect image, because in the end of the day you cannot be perfect in all the subjects. So what I did then is that I worked really hard. I mean, I studied till 2 o'clock in the night. I tried to make sure that all my scores were always very high, and I didn't allow myself any kind of space for failures. And in fact, whenever I did make mistakes, I felt really anxious, I was really worried, and it did prompt some reaction from other students and teachers, because they were surprised whenever I just got a slightly lower mark. And I'm not even talking about failures, just a slightly lower marks than my usual marks would actually prompt some reactions. So I felt very uncomfortable being anything else than the perfect student. And in fact, even when I finished school and continued with my studies and then in my work life, I still felt like that label followed me, because I still had that unrealistic image that I needed to know everything. I needed to be always perfect, and it was so difficult to maintain. It was so stressful, and it took a lot of effort and work to finally admit the fact that it was impossible to be that perfect person, and that sometimes you should just admit if you don't know something, and you cannot know everything. So this is something I'm still working on, but it was interesting to me to analyze this, especially as a part of this course, and again just notice that some labels that were created many years ago are still here, are still affecting me. And I think in the end of the day, what makes us human is our ability to change. So that's why the labels are so bad, because we're basically telling person that this is your label and this is who you are, without giving them that chance to actually change. And it's really sad to see some people leading their life by avoiding some experiences just because they don't think they're worth it, or they don't think they can do something because of the labels they keep carrying in their lives. So what can you do if you feel like you have labels? Well, first of all, try to think of all the labels you have. Really sit down, write them on a piece of paper. Think of everything in the old times, and also what sort of labels you think you have today. Then try to understand where exactly those labels are coming from. Is it something that your colleagues created, your friends, your family members, or is it something you created yourself for yourself? Then try to see where they're coming from. Are they linked to a specific incident in your life, or is it just something that happened because of a single phrase you've said? And then progressively try to challenge some of those labels. The next step would be to try to see any sort of patterns or similarities in your labels. So do you feel about yourself the same way as your colleagues or your friends do? Or maybe on the contrary, the way you see yourself is completely different from how other people are labeling you. And try to think, why is it the case? Now, I do believe that we should be true to our own feelings, but I also think we should never be ignorant to how other people see us. And rather than see it as some sort of judgment, it's always interesting for me to understand, well, why do you see me this way rather than the way I see myself? So try to also explore this from both sides and not just from your point of view. And finally, of course, remember that even if you manage to challenge some of the labels that have been assigned by other people upon yourself, don't expect people to change. We all want to live in a world where people are very understanding, and once you challenge them, they come on board and kind of say, actually, I was wrong, I'm really sorry, I will never call you that again. In fact, it doesn't often happen. When we challenge other people, they become even more strongly opinionated about their decisions. They might think that no, their labels is correct, and therefore just be aware that people might not change their labels just because you became more aware of them or reflected on them. So be prepared for that, and maybe just try to be not affected by those labels in the future. Also, on the other side, if we're talking about the labels that you're assigning to other people, also really try to challenge yourself and, make sure you don't apply those labels, because it's so easy to do. It comes so naturally. But really try to remember that other people should have a chance to change. And just because somebody was kind to us once, it would be ridiculous to believe that that person leads just a saint life without ever making mistakes. At the same time, if somebody did something bad, it would be unfair to think that they lead their life by only doing bad actions or bad things. Don't allow a single event in somebody's life label them for the rest of their life, because I'm sure you wouldn't want this to happen to you either. And just like with any individual, this will apply to counselor as well. So we, as we're learning to become counselors, need to be aware of the labels we might have for ourselves, or even the labels we might try to assign to the clients when we see them for the first time. When they walk into the office and we see that maybe they are covered in tattoos, make sure that we are non-judgmental and we just see them as a client as opposed to a person covered in tattoos, and make any decisions about what sort of stories they might bring to this counseling room. So next week we'll be talking about stereotypes, but for now I'd like to thank you for your attention. Please remember to like the videos, leave your comments, and most importantly, take good care of yourself. I'll see you next week. Bye bye.